This is Chapter 7, Section 1. It's on chromosomes and phenotype. And the key concept here is that the chromosomes on which genes are located can affect the expression of traits. So 2 copies of each autosomal gene are going to affect phenotype. So your autosomes, those were the chromosomes 1 through 22. Whereas chromosome 23, that pair were the sex chromosomes that determined an individual's sex or their gender. And we get 2 copies of each autosomal gene because you get one copy from mom and 1 copy from dad, and both of those copies are going to determine the phenotype, meaning that all of your characteristics, like something like hair, eye color, skin color, those types of traits are going to be determined by both copies of the genes. The one that you get from mom and the one that you get from dad, which is kind of common sense. You look like a mixture of your mom and dad, and it's for that reason, because you use both copies of each of those genes. And this slide's talking about different genetic disorders that are related to the autosomes, what are called autosomal genetic disorders. So the example down here is cystic fibrosis. Cystic fibrosis is a genetically inherited disease where individuals, because they're missing both copies of a crucial gene, they develop this really thick, sticky mucus in their lungs and other areas of their organs, and that buildup of that mucus just causes all sorts of problems, and really ultimately leads to death in most everybody. But the genetics of how it works is kind of an important case study, where this capital C right here is a normal allele. So if I draw your chromosomes, so you get 1 chromosome from mom, the other chromosome from dad, and let's say this is chromosome 3. So, and let's say this is the gene we're looking at right here, where you need both copies of these genes, where if you're missing both copies of these genes right here, these 2 genes from mom and dad aren't working, then you develop cystic fibrosis. Meaning that if you have 2 heterozygous parents, that means they're going to be carriers because they have 1 copy of their allele that works and the other copy that doesn't work. So that X represents the copy of the gene that doesn't work. Meaning they still have enough of that that protein being produced where they're not affected, but they're still carrying 1 chromosome copy that doesn't work. So whenever they make their sperm and their eggs, there's a chance that that sperm or that egg's gonna carry the lowercase c copy that can match up with another lowercase c copy from a different parent to create cystic fibrosis. So if you do the Punnett square cross here, there's a 1/4 chance you can get a homozygous dominant. Half of the children are going to be heterozygous carriers, where they won't be affected. They won't have cystic fibrosis, but they're still going to have that lowercase c. They're still going to have a defective gene copy right here. And then 1/4 of the children are going to be homozygous recessive, which means they're going to have the cystic fibrosis. And that's because they would have both copies of their genes knocked out. Disorders caused by dominant alleles are uncommon, meaning that most genetic disorders happen because you have both copies of the gene on the chromosome from mom and the chromosome from dad that don't work. Meaning it's very rare that you're going to have some sort of genetic disorder that's caused by the dominant alleles, because that would mean that there's some sort of genetic disorder that happens because you're producing too much of a protein, which isn't nearly as common as just something not working. Think of like your car. Usually what happens, for your car to stop working is that some sort of part in that car, breaks down. It doesn't work properly. That's the same thing for the body, where what happens is you have some sort of gene along your chromosome that just stops working properly. And if it happens to both copies of those genes, then it would be like, some part in your car not working properly, and it's going to break down. Okay, this is just reviewing the basic concept of sex chromosomes and how you determine male versus female, which we've talked about before, but I'll just go over it again real quick. Genes that are going to be on sex chromosomes, they're referred to as sex-linked genes, which should be kind of obvious given the name. Where the Y chromosome is what makes a male. It has all the genes along there that determine, things like testes production, formation of the penis, all the stuff that makes a male, that kind of stuff. That's all coded in the Y chromosome. Whereas the X chromosome, males also have an X chromosome, and females have two of them. The X chromosome just has genes that they affect many different traits, but they're not gender specific necessarily. And one other important point is if you have a female and a male parent, you obviously are going to get two females and two males, 50-50. Okay, so males have an XY genotype, and all of a male's sex-linked genes are expressed. And this is a really, really important idea here. And it's very important that you understand what this means. What it's saying is that all of the sex-linked genes, so all of the genes along this Y chromosome and all the genes along this X chromosome are expressed, meaning that we use those genes, we open up that book, so to speak, and use it to make proteins. Whereas on females have two X chromosomes. They got their two X chromosomes, where what happens in females is they just choose one of these X chromosomes to use, and then they just don't even use the other X chromosome. Males, since they only have one X chromosome, they're always going to use that X chromosome to use all of those genes here. And that's because males have no second copy of their sex-linked genes. And that's exactly what this is saying here, where females have what's called X chromosome inactivation, where they turn off one of their X chromosomes. And the classic example of this happening in nature is what happens with calico cats. So calico cats have kind of that famous spotted color on their fur, and what's causing that is X chromosome inactivation. So these skin cells right here, they chose to inactivate one of these two X chromosomes. And they all chose to inactivate the same X chromosome. Whereas these darker patches right here, these skin cells inactivated the opposite X chromosome, which caused the genes that were affecting skin color on that X chromosome to be expressed, so that you had the black fur. Same thing over here. So the different patches are coming from different skin cells choosing a different X chromosome to activate. In contrast, you look at this male calico cat, the males don't have the spots. And the reason for that is because they only have one X chromosome. So every skin cell, throughout this cat is going to be expressing that single X chromosome. So they're always going to be expressing the same genes that code for that skin color. Okay, and that's going to do it for this section.